Okay, so this is Sir Walter Scott, A Legend of the Wars of Montrose. Excuse me. Chapter 5, though it's a little bit into chapter 5. This is the long story. If you care to hear a long story, said Lord Menteith, at this time of night, I can tell you why the circumstances of Alan's birth account so well for his singular character, as to put such satisfaction entirely out of the question. A long story, my lord, said Captain Dalgetty, is next to a good evening draught and a warm nightcap, the best shoeing horn for drawing on a sound sleep. And since your lordship is pleased to take the trouble to tell it, I shall rest your patient and obliged auditor. Anderson, said Lord Menteith, and you, Sibold, are dying to hear, I suppose, of this strange man too, and I believe I must indulge your curiosity, and that you may know how to behave to him in time of need. You had better step to the fire then. Excuse me, let's get this mic a bit nearer. Having thus assembled an audience about him, Lord Menteith sat down upon the edge of the four-posted bed, while Captain Dalgetty, wiping the relics of the posset from his beard and mustachios, and repeating the first verse of the Lutheran psalm, Alle gut Geister loben die Herrn, etc., forgive my German, rolled himself into one of the places of repose, and thrusting his shock pate from between the blankets, listened to Lord Menteith's relation in a most luxurious state between sleeping and waking. The father, said Lord Menteith, of the two brothers, Angus and Alan Macaulay, was a gentleman of consideration and family, being the chief of the Highland clan. A good account, though not numerous. His lady, the mother of these young men, was a gentlewoman of good family, and if I may be permitted to say, one nearly connected with my own. Her brother, an honourable and spirited young man, obtained from James VI a grant of forestry and other privileges over a royal chase adjacent to this castle, and in exercising and defending these rights, he was so unfortunate as to involve himself in a quarrel with some of our Highland freebooters, or caterans, of whom I think, Captain Dalgetty, you must have heard. And that I have, said the captain, exerting himself to answer the appeal. Before I left the Marischal College of Aberdeen, Dougal Gar was playing the devil in the Garioch, and the Farquharsons on Deeside, and the clan Chatton on the Gordons lands, and the Grants and the Camerons in Moriland, and since that, I have seen the Cravats and the Pandurs in Pannonia and Transylvania, and the Cossacks from the Polish frontier, and robbers, banditti, and barbarians of all countries besides, so that I have a distinct idea of your broken Highlandmen. The clan, said Lord Menteith, with whom the maternal uncle of the Macaulays had been placed in feud, was a small sect of banditti, called, from their houseless state, and their incessantly wandering among the mountains and glens, the children of the mist. They are a fierce and hardy people, with all irritability and wild and vengeful passions, proper to men who have never known the restraint of civilized society. A party of them lay in wait for the unfortunate warden of the forest, surprised him while hunting alone and unattended, and slew him with every circumstance of inventive cruelty. They cut off his head and resolved in a bravado to exhibit it at the castle of his brother-in-law. The laird was absent, and the lady reluctantly received as guests men against whom perhaps she was afraid to shut her gates. Refreshments were placed before the children of the mist, who took an opportunity to take the head of their victim from the plaid in which it was wrapped, placed it on the table, and put a piece of bread between the lifeless jaws, bidding them do their office now, since many a good meal they had eaten at that table. The lady, who had been absent for some household purpose, entered at this moment, and upon beholding her brother's head, fled like an arrow out of the house into the woods, uttering shriek upon shriek. The ruffians, satisfied with this savage triumph, withdrew. The terrified menials, after overcoming the alarm to which they had been subjected, sought their unfortunate mistress in every direction, but she was nowhere to be found. The unfortunate husband returned next day and, with the assistance of his people, undertook a more anxious and distant search, but to equally little purpose. It was believed universally that, in the ecstasy of her terror, she must either have thrown herself over one of the numerous precipices which overhang the river, or into a deep lake about a mile from the castle. Her loss was the more lamented, as she was 6 months advanced in her pregnancy, Angus Macaulay, her eldest son, having been born about 18 months before. But I tire you, Captain Dalgetty. You seem inclined to sleep. By no means, answered the soldier. I am not whit somnolent. I always hear best with my eyes shut. It is a fashion I learned when I stood sentinel. And I dare say, said Lord Menteith, aside to Anderson, the weight of the halbert of the sergeant of the rounds often made him open them. Being apparently, however, in the humour of storytelling, the young nobleman went on, addressing himself chiefly to his servants, without minding the slumbering veteran. Every baron in the country, he said, now swore vengeance for this dreadful crime. They took arms with the relations and brother-in-law of the murdered person, and the children of the mist were hunted down, I believe, with as little mercy as they had themselves manifested. 17 heads, the bloody trophies of their vengeance, were distributed among the allies, and fed the crows upon the gates of their castles. The survivors sought out more distant wildernesses, to which they retreated. To your right hand, countermarch and retreat to your former ground, said Captain Dalgetty, the military phrase having produced the correspondent word of command, and then, starting up, professed he had been profoundly attentive to every word that had been spoken. It is the custom in summer, said Lord Menteith, without minding his apology, to send the cows to the upland pastures to have the benefit of the grass, and the maids of the village and of the family go there to milk them in the morning and evening. While thus employed, the females of this family, to their great terror, perceived that their motions were watched at a distance by a pale, thin, meagre figure, bearing a strong resemblance to their deceased mistress, and passing, of course, for her apparition. When some of the boldest resolved to approach this faded form, it fled from them into the woods with a wild shriek. The husband, informed of this circumstance, came up to the glen with some attendants, and took his measures so well as to intercept the retreat of the unfortunate fugitive, and to secure the person of his unfortunate lady, though her intellect proved to be totally deranged. How she supported herself during her wandering in the woods could not be known. Some suppose she lived upon roots and wild berries, with which the woods at that season abounded. But the greater part of the vulgar were satisfied that she must have subsisted upon the milk of the wild does, or been nourished by the fairies, or supported in some manner equally marvellous. Her reappearance was more easily accounted for. She had seen from the thicket the milking cows, to superintend which had been her favourite domestic employment, and the habit had prevailed even in her deranged state of mind. In due season, the unfortunate lady was delivered of a boy, who not only showed no appearance of having suffered from his mother's calamities, but appeared to be an infant of uncommon health and strength. The unhappy mother, after her confinement, recovered her reason, at least in a great measure, but never her health and spirits. Alan was her only joy. Her attention to him was unremitting, and unquestionably she must have impressed upon his early mind many of these superstitious ideas to which his moody and enthusiastic temper gave so ready a reception. She died when he was about 10 years old. Her last words were spoken to him in private, but there is little doubt that they conveyed an injunction of vengeance upon the children of mist, with which he has since amply complied. From this moment the habits of Alan Macaulay were totally changed. He had hitherto been his mother's constant companion, listening to her dreams and repeating his own, and feeding his imagination, which, probably from the circumstances preceding his birth, was constitutionally deranged, with all the wild and terrible superstitions so common to the mountaineers, to which his unfortunate mother had become much addicted since her brother's death. By living in this manner, the boy had gotten a timid, wild, startled look, loved to seek out solitary places in the woods, and was never so much terrified as by the approach of children of the same age. I remember, although some years younger, being brought up here by my father upon a visit, nor can I forget the astonishment with which I saw this infant hermit shun every attempt I made to engage him in the sports natural to our age. I can remember his father bewailing his disposition to mine and alleging at the same time that it was impossible for him to take from his wife the company of the boy, as he seemed to be the only consolation that remained to her in this world, and as the amusement which Alan's society afforded her seemed to prevent the recurrence, at least in its full force, of that fearful malady by which she had been visited. But after the death of his mother, the habits and manners of the boy seemed at once to change. It is true he remained as thoughtful and serious as before, and long fits of silence and abstraction showed plainly that his disposition in this respect was in no degree altered. But at other times he sought out the rendezvous of the youth of the clan, which he had hitherto seemed anxious to avoid. He took share in all their exercises, and from his various extraordinary personal strength, soon excelled his brothers and other youths, whose age considerably exceeded his own. They had hitherto held him in contempt, now feared, as they did not love him, and instead of Alan's being esteemed a dreaming, womanish, and feeble-minded boy, those who encountered him in sports or military exercise now complained that, when heated by the strife, he was too apt to turn game into earnest, and to forget that he was only engaged in a friendly trial of strength. But I speak to regardless ears, said Lord Menteith, interrupting himself, for the captain's nose now gave the most indisputable signs that he was fast locked in the arms of oblivion. If you mean the ears that are snorting swine, my lord, said Anderson, they are indeed shut to anything that you can say. Nevertheless, this place being unfit for more private conference, I hope you will have the goodness to proceed, for Sybil's benefit and for mine. The history of this poor young fellow has a deep and wild interest in it. You must know then, continued Lord Menteith, that Alan continued to increase in strength and activity till his 15th year, about which time he assumed a total independence of character and impatience of control, which much alarmed his surviving parent. He was absent in the woods for whole days and nights, under pretence of hunting, though he did not always bring home game. His father was the more alarmed because several of the children of the mist, encouraged by the increasing troubles of the state, had ventured back to their old haunts, nor did he think it altogether safe to renew any attack upon them. The risk of Alan, in his wanderings, sustaining injury from these vindictive freebooters was a perpetual source of apprehension. I was myself upon a visit to the castle when this matter was brought to a crisis. Alan had been absent since daybreak in the woods, where I had sought for him in vain. It was a dark, stormy night, and he did not return. His father expressed the utmost anxiety and spoke of detaching a party at the dawn of morning in quest of him, when, as we were sitting at the supper table, the door suddenly opened, and Alan entered the room with a proud, firm and confident air. His intractability of temper, as well as the unsettled state of his mind, had such an influence over his father that he suppressed all other tokens of displeasure, excepting the observation that I had killed a fat buck and had returned before sunset, while he supposed Alan, who had been on the hill till midnight, had returned with empty hands. "Are you sure of that?" said Alan fiercely. "Here is something will tell you another tale." We now observed his hands were bloody, and that there were spots of blood on his face. and waited the issue with impatience, when suddenly, undoing the corner of his plaid, he rolled down on the table a human head, bloody and new severed, saying at the same time, Lie thou where the head of a better man lay before ye. From the haggard features and matted red hair and beard, partly grizzled with age, his father and others present recognised the head of Hector of the Mist, excuse me, a well-known leader among the outlaws, redoubted for strength and ferocity, who had been active in the murder of the unfortunate warden, and had escaped by desperate defence and extraordinary agility when so many of his companions were destroyed. We were all, it may be believed, struck with surprise, but Alan refused to gratify our curiosity, and we only conjectured that we must have overcome the outlaw after a desperate struggle, because we discovered that he had sustained several wounds from the contest. All measures were now taken to ensure him against the revenge of the freebooters, but neither his wounds nor the positive command of his father, nor even the locking the gates of the castle and the doors of his apartment, were precautions adequate to prevent Alan from seeking out the very persons to whom he was particularly obnoxious. He made his escape by night from the window of the apartment, and laughing at his father's vain care, produced on one occasion the head of one, and another those of two of the children of the mist. At length these men, fierce as they were, became appalled by the inveterate animosity and audacity with which Alan sought out their recesses. As he never hesitated to encounter any odds, they concluded that he must bear a charmed life, or fight under the guardianship of some supernatural influence. Neither gun, dirk, nor dorlac, they said, availed aught against him. They imputed this to the remarkable circumstances under which he was born, and at length 5 or 6 of the stoutest caterans of the Highlands would have fled at Alan's halloo or the blast of his horn. In the meanwhile, however, they carried on their old trade, and did the Macaulays, as well as their kinsmen and allies, as much mischief as they could. This provoked another expedition against the tribe, in which I had my share. We surprised them effectually by besetting at once the upper and underpasses of their country, and made such clean work as is usual on these occasions, burning and slaying right before us. In this terrible species of war, even the females and the helpless do not always escape. One little maiden alone, who smiled upon Alan's drawn dirk, escaped his vengeance upon my earnest entreaty. She was brought to the castle, and here bred up under the name of Anna Lyle, the most beautiful little fairy certainly that ever danced upon a heath by moonlight. It was long ere Alan could endure the presence of the child, until it occurred to his imagination, from her features perhaps, that she did not belong to the hated blood of his enemies, but had become their captive in some of their incursions, a circumstance not in itself impossible, but in which he believes as firmly as in Holy Writ. He is particularly delighted by her skill in music, which is so exquisite that she far exceeds the best performers in this country in playing on the clarisac or harp. It was discovered that this produced upon the disturbed spirits of Alan, in his gloomiest moods, beneficial effects, similar to those experienced by the Jewish monarch of old, and so engaging is the temper of Anna Lyle, so fascinating the innocence and gaiety of her disposition, that she is considered and treated in the castle rather as the sister of the proprietor than as a dependent upon his charity. Indeed, it is impossible for anyone to see her without being deeply interested by the ingenuity, liveliness, and sweetness of her disposition. "Take care, my lord," said Anderson, smiling. "There is danger in such violent commendations. Alan Macaulay, as your lordship described him, would prove no very safe rival." "Pooh-pooh," said Lord Menteith, laughing, yet blushing at the same time. "Alan is not accessible to the passion of love. And for myself," and he more gravely, "Annette's unknown birth is a sufficient reason against serious designs, and her unprotected state precludes every other. "It is spoken like yourself, my lord," said Anderson, "but I trust you will proceed with your interesting story." "It is well nigh finished," said Lord Menteith. "I have only to add that from the great strength and courage of Alan Macaulay, from his energetic